The Black Wolf. I will tell this story on behalf of my friend Maria. I have no doubt that the story you are telling is true. I remember hearing knocks on my window, 3 quick knocks to be precise. I turned off the light and darkness enveloped my room, so I used the light from my phone to find my way to the window. I looked outside and saw nothing but darkness. There was nothing. I returned to bed and crawled under the covers. Knock, knock, knock. Here he is again, but this time with a louder voice. I pulled the covers over my head and tightly closed my eyes, wishing for this constant noise to disappear. For a moment there was nothing but the sound of my breathing. When I started to doze off, I heard another sound, tap, tap, tap. I opened my eyes quickly, and my heart rate increased. The sound of knocking on my window was much louder this time, and then I realized that I wasn't imagining anything. I ignored the knocks, but I was sure that anyone or anything knocking on my window could hear my heart pounding out of my chest. I connected the headphones, played some music, and tightly closed my eyes. In the end, sleep overcame me. Bang, bang, bang. I woke up startled by loud knocks on my window, strong enough to shake the glass in its frame. I looked at the alarm clock. It was 3:26 a.m. I started to sweat and my heart rate increased. I was sure that my heart would beat right out of my chest. I got up from the bed shivering and wrapped my blanket around my shoulders. I left my room and walked down the hallway to the living room. I lay down on the couch and relaxed under the blanket. When I lay down, I heard his voice. The howling was low and deep. It lasted for about 30 seconds and then stopped, but I swear I can still hear it, its echo resonating in my mind. I sat and looked through the window behind my couch. I quickly covered my mouth to stifle my scream. There was standing in the backyard of my house the biggest wolf I have ever seen. Its fur was black and thick, almost resembling a shadow wrapped in silk. The wolf's eyes seemed to stare into my soul, gazing deep into the farthest corners of my mind. The wolf's iris was golden and glowed in the moonlight. I didn't dare to break eye contact for fear that he would jump through my window and hit me while I was sitting. The more I stared into the wolf's eyes, the more my astonishment grew at his frightening gaze. I felt the wolf scratching at my mind, digging into the surface of my skull. It felt as if the black wolf was trying to penetrate my skull to feed on my mind. Suddenly the clouds covered the moon, and my yard fell into darkness. Thus the black wolf disappeared. When the clouds moved away from above the moon, there was no trace of the wolf. It was as if he had just disappeared, fading away with the darkness. I can't remember when I fell asleep after that, but I know nothing else happened until the next morning. I asked my mom if she heard the howling, and she replied, "No, my dear, I didn't hear anything last night. I slept like a little child." The day went by normally. I went to school as I do on any day of the week, and it was uneventful to say the least. Later that night, while I was in bed, I heard howling outside my window. It felt like it lasted for hours before I finally fell asleep. The next day was the same, devoid of events. The only strange event was a drawing of a black wolf on the next blank page of my biology journal. I knew it couldn't be any of my friends, and considering my father's lack of artistic skill, it couldn't be him either. I know that I didn't draw the wolf, so how did it get there? My lessons that day passed slowly. During lunch, things started to get a bit strange. I was sitting in the yard with some friends. I was telling them about the strange and scary things that happened. When I took my lunch out of my bag, I unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite. Its taste was terrible, and I immediately felt a twisting sensation in my mouth. I looked at the sandwich and felt a sense of horror at the sight between the slices of bread. There was no lunch meat as I had thought. I was filled with the foul smell of raw meat that clearly told me it was spoiled. This is not all in the spoiled raw meat sandwich. There were fat worms wriggling. I stood up and ran to the trash can, vomiting the contents of my stomach and spitting out the rotten meat and worms. I can still feel the disgusting sticky remnants completely covering the inside of my mouth. I can still taste the mixed recipe of vomit, rotten meat, and greasy worms on my tongue. I ran into the school, ignoring my friends' calls. I rushed through the girls' bathroom door and bent over the sink, crying like a child. I must have washed my mouth with soap and water 1,000 times before the school principal's assistant entered the bathroom and placed her hand on my shoulder. "Maria, are you okay, my dear?" she asked me in a calm yet worried tone. I shook my head in madness and felt that I was ready to vomit again. The assistant principal led me out of the girls' bathroom, and I noticed my friends standing outside with worried looks on their faces. I walked with her all the way to her office, and I was still crying. As soon as I stepped into her office, I sat in the chair opposite her desk, and slowly the tears stopped flowing down my cheeks. The assistant director sat in front of me and began to speak. "Maria, my dear, do you want to talk about what happened at lunch?" I rubbed my eyes and remained silent. "Your friend showed me what was in your sandwich. Do you have any idea how that happened?" I slowly shook my head and continued, "You understand that I will have to report this to Child Protective Services, right?" I looked at her. She had a look of worry and empathy on her face. "No, no, don't do that. It wasn't my father's fault." I realized that thing that was knocking on my windows is what did that. He must have also taken my diary and drawn that wolf. I realized with disgust that he might have broken into my house the night before like a freight train. "Maria, my dear." I tried to help my manager to get her attention. I snapped out of my daze and continued her conversation. "You need to realize how this looks," she said calmly. By reading her face, I knew what she was thinking. "My parents didn't do this. It's not their fault," I said sharply. She looked surprised and continued, "Who is at fault, Maria?" she asked while clasping her hands together on the desk in front of her. I bit my lip and leaned forward in the chair. "There's something chasing me." He was knocking and knocking on my window. I drew this picture of a wolf in my diary. And I paused for a moment. I saw this huge black wolf in my backyard. And it just disappeared. I exploded and started tapping my foot nervously. "Maria, do you want to talk to the advisor about this matter? I think she can help you with." I interrupted her with a sharp tone in my voice. "I'm not crazy." By that time I had gotten angry. I didn't understand what she was saying. She simply sighed. "I'm not saying you're crazy. All I'm saying is that I believe Mrs. Judy can help you with this matter better than I can." I frowned with my arms crossed. When I started writing a paper to the advisor's office, the deputy director handed it to me and left her office angrily. My appointment with the advisor was at 3:20 p.m., so I went to another class. I barely listened to anything my teacher said. When it was time for the meeting with the school counselor, things went exactly as expected. They accused me of fabricating the events that were happening. According to the counselor, I was inventing fantasies to cope with what was happening in my home life. There was nothing happening in the house except for all the nonsense that this person or this thing was doing to me. The next few days were the same. The tapping and knocking on my window at night prevents me from sleeping. The constant fear of being watched, followed by that checking everything I eat and drink for unwanted visitors or anything that looks suspicious or cannibals. Although new things have started to happen, I used to hear the howling at night, every night an angry, fierce, deep howl that seemed to get closer and closer until it felt like it was coming right from outside my window. The howling did not stop. He was driving me crazy. These strange symbols started appearing on my window, drawn in what looks like blood. Another drawing appeared in my diary. I was losing my mind. The deprivation of sleep and mental torture were affecting me. I started to skip school and hide in my room all day and night. One day I heard the doorbell ring. My parents weren't home, so I woke up, left my room, and answered the door. I saw the FedEx delivery truck driving away, emitting black smoke from the exhaust. I looked down and saw a medium-sized package bearing my name and address on the shipping label. There was no return address. I took the box inside and placed it on my bed, and I grabbed a pair of scissors. I crawled onto my bed and examined the box. Nothing seemed unusual about it, until I cut the tape and looked inside. I placed a folded cardboard box over a black garbage bag that looked like it contained something. I opened the note and saw that it was addressed to Maria. Then below those words there was a thin handwriting that said, "Enjoy, little pig, the sight, the black wolf." I set the note aside and opened the garbage bag. I almost screamed when I saw what was inside. The rotting foul pig's head was staring directly into my eyes. I covered my mouth with my hand because the foul smell made my eyes tear up. I felt like I was going to throw up. The pig's mouth was wide open, revealing its pale, dry tongue hanging out. The pig's eyes were gray and sunken, oozing with the fluids of decay like the tears of death itself. The smell was very strong. I grabbed the box, feeling like I was about to suffocate. Opened my window and threw the box outside. The pig's head rolled out of the box and fell onto the grass. I slammed my window shut and sat in the corner of my room, crying and shaking. I was swaying back and forth, hugging my knees for what felt like hours. The sky grew dark outside. When I realized how much time I had spent hiding in the corner, crying like a madman, I remembered that my parents had left the city for a few days on a business trip. I was completely alone. It was past midnight, and I was sitting in my room checking the notifications on my phone. While I was browsing through the messages, I heard a knock on the door, 3 light taps. I got up, wondering who could be at my door at this late hour of the night. I left my room and approached the front door. When I reached for the doorknob, I came to a complete stop in my tracks. Bang, bang, bang. The stranger knocked on the door again, but this time with force. My heart started to beat strongly, and I made sure the door was closed. I heard laughter from the other side of the door. Little pig, let me in," I gasped upon hearing the sound and felt frozen in place. Bang bang bang, I heard a knock on the door again, then silence fell. I took a few steps back, my heart pounding hard outside my chest. And suddenly the door swung open forcefully. They kicked the door to open it. Oh my God, I'm going to die, I thought to myself. I couldn't make a sound. I fell on my backside and stared with wide eyes at the figure that was standing and waving in the entrance. He was like a living shadow. He stood still for a moment, then rushed forward like lightning and closed the door behind him. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He grabbed me by my hair and started pulling me down the hall towards the basement door. I kicked and resisted, but it didn't seem to make any difference. He opened the door and pulled me down the stairs to the basement. I felt myself being held and sensed pressure around my wrist and ankle. I tried to scream, but a piece of cloth was forcefully shoved into my mouth, secured with duct tape. I was struggling and fighting against my constraints in vain. The basement light flickered to life with the turn of the key, and my eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light. The attackers advanced forward in the light, and I screamed only to be silenced by the bit in my mouth. He wasn't a monster at all. He was a man, or at least I thought he was a man. He seemed to be in his late teens or early 20s. He was wearing a black leather mask shaped like a wolf's face, roaring and angry. I could see the man's eyes behind the mask. The skin around his eyes was painted black. Its cross was completely black, and its iris was a glowing golden color. Just like the one belonging to the wolf I saw, he was dressed entirely in black, adorned with heavy military combat boots, a tight black hood with a brown skull on the back, and black jeans. He unzipped the hood and threw it on the ground. I could see the exposed skin filled with scars on his thin trunk. His muscles contracted when he stretched. "Little pig, tell me, are you afraid of me? The big bad wolf." His voice was deep with a slight rumble, like the growl of a wolf. He seemed arrogant and bold. I was crying again by that time and shaking uncontrollably. A moan from behind the bridle. "Ha ha, it must be." Sadistic laughter and grammatical mistakes. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked and stepped closer until his tall figure loomed over me. He seemed to be at least 6 feet tall. I shook my head in denial. "Shut up. Seems that a pig like you won't remember. Like a sheep in the flock. This isn't personal or anything like that. I have simply put my research at risk, so I am putting your life at risk." My eyes widened and I pulled the ropes. It only tightened around my wrists and ankles. "You are a disgusting little pig. You need to learn a lesson," she complained about the threatening tone in his voice. The man with the black wolf mask lunged forward and grabbed my wrists, which were bound to the arm of the chair. I tried to ask for help to no avail. This little pig went to the forest. He grabbed my index finger and broke it. I saw a white flash and pain spreading in my arm. "Hold my middle finger. This little pig stayed at home." I heard my finger crack when the bone broke. My screams and pleas seemed like an injured animal wailing, muzzled and silenced. "Move to the next finger. This little pig had rotten meat." "Bob." Then my next little finger. "This little pig had no meat." "Hello." I moved to my thumb. I shook my head quickly, desperately trying to plead with him to stop. He removed the tape and the cloth from my mouth. I gasped for air, and before I could say anything, he interjected with a sweet and sadistic tone in his deep voice. "And this little pig is crying oink oink oink," she screamed, and the echo of her voice resonated in the basement. In a flash, he put the bridle back in my mouth and sealed my lips with tape. "Oh, what a wonderful sound." He took a deep breath through his nose and straightened up, tilting his head back towards the ceiling as if my scream was a sedative flowing through his veins like molten fire. I saw part of his face just below the mask. His smile widened, revealing sharp, pointed fangs. I noticed then that his hair was shaved on one side and was black. His ears were pointed like a wolf's ears. To this day, I still hold vivid memories of that selfish son who shows the entire class my research paper, even reading some parts aloud word for word. I looked like a fool. It was only the second day of my freshman year, and everyone thought I was eccentric. Do you think I will forget that? I have ruined all 3 years of my damn high school experience. Oh, but of course that little laughing piglet would forget. Things were easy, so very easy. She was lucky that I dropped out of school. If I hadn't done it, I would never have heard the end of it at the moment the bell rings on the last day of the final year. It's not important now. All her bones will break soon anyway. The masked madman was deep in thought. I was gasping heavily, almost struggling to breathe as I felt a tape on my lips tightening every time I inhaled. He must be arrested. He must be arrested. I constantly tried to convince myself that everything would be all right. My thoughts were racing faster than the wolves chasing their next meal. My eyes began to wander around the room. I no longer knew where to look. He will be arrested, right? He cannot escape from this. Fingerprints. He will leave fingerprints behind. I suddenly gained some hope until I looked at the man. Oh my God! I noticed that he was wearing black military gloves. He walked towards me slowly, and I heard the sound of his combat boots approaching. He stared with his eyes, then finally closed them completely to avoid taking another look at that damned mask. Did you feel fear that quickly, little pig? The fun has just begun. I complained quietly, but my scream was muffled by the tape. There is no point in screaming anymore. No one has heard me. At this stage, no one will ever hear me. He stepped forward and stood directly in front of me. I tried to twist. I couldn't bear it. I was just looking at him. I pushed the chair down and fell onto the concrete floor. My knees were burning like hell. I felt warm tears streaming down my face when I immediately heard a strong voice, and my chair was suddenly pushed back to its original position. Oh, little pig! Oh, you damn little pig! He shouted and pulled something out of his back pocket. I felt my heart racing. I felt a heaviness in my chest. I felt a warmth in my cheeks. I swear I felt as if a hot iron was pressing against my face. I felt fear both physically and mentally. Take out a lighter. This was my last moment. He lit the lighter, and the glow of the flame reflected on his dark leather mask. He brought it closer to me, and I began to tightly close my eyes once again. I felt a sharp pain in my forearm and let out a moan of pain. I suddenly felt the ropes around my left ankle loosen and tear. I kicked and hit his chin with the tip of my foot. He let out a loud sigh, unbothered when he heard him flick the lighter again. Damn! I thought to myself. Did you think you could escape from me? The Black Wolf laughed louder than ever before. I felt the heavy heat of the flames touching the tips of my toes as I tried to twist away, but I failed miserably. Tears streamed down my face quickly. I slowly opened my eyes. I saw him standing and taking something from the nearest shelf. He was walking back and forth. Oh my God! Is the little pig scared? Boo-hoo! He started to laugh. Little pig, let's get started. I noticed that he got a folding knife from the shelf. I didn't want to die like this. I never imagined that I would die like this. I started to remember all those childhood memories when an idea struck me. I know who this person is, or rather who was. I remember him. I remember what I did in my first year of high school. The feeling of guilt was heavier than the weight of the anxiety that overwhelmed me every time I looked at this man's mask. The man whose mother mistreated him throughout his life or something like that. I was drowning in thought. Finally, I woke up from that painful feeling. I was experiencing a wound on my arm. It felt as if the knife sliced through every piece of flesh like butter, which inevitably led to bleeding. I have never seen such a large amount of blood before. I lost consciousness. I woke up to the sound of a door slamming shut. I had been taken off the chair. I was no longer restricted. I ran to my mobile phone and called my parents. They hurried home, and when they arrived, they called the police. They didn't believe me. This cannot happen. They actually believed that I did all of this by myself. No. He can't escape this. How did he manage to hide his traces so well? What even? I felt like I was on the verge of breaking down. I have been through a lot of this only to be told that it was self-harm. I lost consciousness. You damned fools, you know nothing about me if you think I would do something like this to myself. The officers handcuffed me and escorted me to the car. "Don't worry, madam. We will place you in a place where you can improve, all right?" I kicked. I felt stressed and I could no longer bear this situation. And before I realized it, I was sitting in the back seat of a police car, on my way to a horrific place for the insane. I tried to look out the window. The fog was so thick that I couldn't see anything until I closed my eyes and saw faint shapes on the car window. There were words drawn on it with my finger. The transparent letters were clearly prominent on the frosted glass. It said, "The girl who shouted Wolf."